It was a cloudless, sapphire blue sky that day. We had the camping trip planned for months, and it took even longer than that for us to coordinate our vacations so that we could all be there together. It was a reunion I had dreamed of for so long. In high school, we were inseparable. Our weekends consisted of booze and easy girls. After college and getting married, my weekends consisted of sitting at home drinking alone and maybe a date with my wife. Exciting stuff, right? Well, that's how it was for years, until the camping trip. These days, I spend a lot of time with my therapist and a lot more time dwelling on what I could have done to prevent all of this. Survivor guilt's a bitch. I'm writing down this sad, horrible story in hopes that maybe if I tell it, then I won't feel so crazy and that, hopefully, it will relieve the guilt. I spoke to Ron and he wanted to carpool in his new SUV.
It's the newest and greatest. Or at least that's what the salesman told me.
He laughed.
It has different modes for sand, snow, mud, and rain. So if we're stuck in the desert, covered in snow, mud, and a downpour starts, we'll be all set.
He could always make me laugh. That sharp wit of his hadn't dulled in 12 years since high school. Ron wasn't the most athletic guy, but he could slay a room with his humor. We had grown up next door to each other from the time we were born until the painful time of leaving home, bound for different colleges. Ron was off to major in business, while I was going to major in accounting. Thanks to him, I was the smartest jock in school, and I have him to thank for my career now. The trip to the camping spot in Northeast Oregon was going to be a 5-hour trip for us, so I told him we would switch halfway.
No way, man. You were always driving me around in that chick magnet Charger in high school. I owe you at least 600 hours of chauffeuring.
All right, Ron. Whatever you say. Just don't kill us.
I didn't want to tell you this, but your wife told me she was sick of your shit, and she'd split the life insurance if I killed you out here.
Yeah, okay, Ron. Like she'd ever talk to a lowly nerd like you.
Didn't I tell you about the affair?
It was like that for the entire 5-hour drive. Him tossing one inside joke after another. I could have done that for the rest of my life and been happy. God, it's so painful to think about. I'll cherish that trip for the rest of my life. The cabin and the property belonged to Andrew and his family. The property itself was 50 acres and was situated nicely by a beautiful lake. If you're thinking, damn, they must be rich, you're correct. Andrew rolled up in his new Ford Raptor, which I was convinced he had bought for the occasion just because he could. "Sup, guys? Long time no see." He greeted Ron and me as he looked 2 rifle bags from his truck. "Got these babies on special back in town. Thought maybe we'd shoot a deer and have some fresh meat for the weekend." I laughed. "You gonna dress it yourself? I'm not, nor do I know how."
The only thing Andrew knows how to dress is himself.
Ron quipped. "I see you haven't changed," Andrew said, laughing. He went inside and hung his rifles on the mount in the living room. We chilled on his super comfortable couches and watched TV until the others arrived. Howard and Mark showed up about an hour later. They said the wreck had postponed them. Ron laughed and said,
Luckily, the wreck didn't postpone our drinking.
pointing at the 4 empty beer cans set beside each of us. After we drank a few more beers, dusk approached. I remember the sky being painted perfect shades of orange and yellow, with a hint of purple. Laying back in the comfortable deck chair by the lake as the sun sank below the mountains was the most relaxing time I'd had in years. No worries about life, work, or anything else. I'd give anything to go back. As I was basking in the beauty of the sunset, Mark came strolling through the French doors, fishing rods in hand. "Anybody down for some fishing?" He had a grin spread across his face. Fishing was always Mark's favorite hobby, and he was remarkably lucky at it. Somehow, in some way, he managed to catch more fish than any of us. I thought about it and agreed to come along, and so did everyone else. We fished for the rest of the evening. It felt as if every 10 minutes Mark was reeling in another one. I just sat there, tossing back beers, because I always have shit luck with fishing. On the far end of the lake, I saw a couple of deer wandering around, not even seeming to care about us. I considered the idea of going hunting the next day like Andrew asked, but that never happened. At some point that night, old age set in, and we decided it was time to turn in for the night. Ron, Mark, Andrew, and I watched old wrestling matches until we fell asleep, one by one. Howard, being the one who always caved first, was in bed before we were done fishing. In the old days, he would have woken up with some Picasso-level drawings on his face. The next morning, we grabbed all of our camping gear and hiked up the mountainside to the spot that Andrew suggested. I came up here a few days after we made the plans and cleared a nice spot that my family used years ago. It's fantastic. Lots of tree cover and shelter from the rain, a direct view of the lake, and it's not very far from the cabin either. The weather that night was predicted to be perfect by the local meteorologist. "Look out, folks. Tonight will be clear skies for good times on this balmy mid-July day. Today's high is 92, expected to drop to 79 by dusk." We worked together setting up all the tents and getting the fire rolling in the nice little pit that Andrew's family had made. I saw Andrew standing by the entrance of the trail, looking around as if inspecting something. "What do you all think of a hike? The path looks like it's still in decent shape," Andrew said as he inspected it from below.
Well, I brought a machete just in case we came across some thick hedges that needed clearing. Or some sexually aroused camp counselors.
Ron joked.
Calm down, Voorhees. There ain't any of those here. Just sexually deprived early 30s men with receding hairlines,
Howard retorted. "Speak for yourself. I still have a full head of luscious hair and luscious babes at my disposal," Andrew teased as he combed his long hair back with his fingers. "I wish I had thought of this trail when I was up here before."
hair plugs and inflatable dolls. Now let's get on this hike,
Ron said as he walked by Andrew, as we all died laughing. He drew the machete from his hip and marched ahead, acting like an English explorer cutting through the Congo. The trail was terrible. We only had to pause a few times to cut through overgrown foliage, and there was a part that had washed down the hillside that we had to navigate carefully. We reached the top after an hour, and I will admit that I was pouring sweat by then. The other guys were in about the same shape as me, except Ron, who looked to be on the verge of death, and Andrew, who stayed fit over the years. At the top of the mountain, there was a large stone formation that appeared to be an altar, with a stack of stones in the center, measuring about 12 feet high. My parents said the realtor told them it was built by the Nez Perce and was used to make offerings to their gods. Not blood or human sacrifices, but probably baskets of food and such. Andrew educated us. Uh-huh, I responded out of breath. The other guys were chugging water and looking for shade. If that's true, then this would be protected by something. We rested at the mountaintop for a while. We made phone calls, texts, social media updates, etc., as this was the only place that had cell service. After a long, much-needed break, we made our way back down the path. About halfway down, Mark started yelling that he had seen a bear.
I swear to God, Andrew, it was right there in the clearing. It was right behind those pines.
You're losing it, Mark. I've never seen a black bear around here, Andrew replied to him.
Doesn't mean they aren't here. I don't want to be a bear's lunch. Can we just wait and see if it shows again?
Sure, man. Whatever makes you feel better, Andrew said. Maybe I should have brought one of those rifles from the cabin.
That would have been nice, Andrew,
said Mark, who was very distraught by then. He was visibly shaking, and he had a terrified look on his face. It took him half an hour to calm down enough for us to continue back down to the campsite. Once we got there, we were shocked. Andrew and Howard's tent were torn to shreds, and all our possessions were scattered around the campsite, and some were even in the woods. Pissed off and tired, we cleaned up the mess. It was dark by the time we had finished, and we decided it wasn't safe to trek back down the mountain to the cabin. My tent had enough room for 2 people, so I told Howard he could share mine. Mark said that he had to take a piss while we were cleaning, and after we were done, he still wasn't back.
Maybe he got the runs,
suggested Ron. No, I don't think that's it. Something feels wrong, I said. Let's go find him.
Man, after all this walking, and we gotta go babysit Mark?
Ron complained. We searched through the trees and bush for what felt like hours with flashlights, but we couldn't find him. He never responded to our calls, and we never found a trace of him. The only thing we found were some old tire tracks on a narrow path and heard an ATV in the distance, which wasn't uncommon for that area, so I didn't think much of it. On our way back to the camp, most of us were a mixture of aggravated and worried. Mark wasn't one to pull pranks like that. Not even Ron would take it that far. Ron seemed to be especially annoyed. He ranted the whole way back. Just outside the campsite, Ron was in the middle of a fiery spiel.
That son of a bitch. He better not.
He hit the ground with a thud and didn't move. It took my brain a few seconds to notice the arrow sticking out of his right eye.
Oh shit, what the fuck?
I remember yelling. My fight-or-flight instincts kicked in, and I ran for my tent and dove in. I could hear Howard howling outside my tent. My instincts told me to stay inside and not to move, but I had to check on my friend. Throwing my instincts aside, I peeped out and saw him on the ground where Ron died, grabbing at his bloody ankle. A wooden spike was jammed into his ankle, wrapped in a homemade trap that looked like a small cage. He was lying on his back, screaming. Then a gun fired and erased half of his face. The other guys were still scrambling around outside when that happened. We froze in our positions for a few seconds. Then everybody scattered. That was the last time I saw them. That's one of the hardest parts of this story. My last memory of them alive is us scattering in a frenzy. In my panic, I forgot my flashlight, and the path I ran down blended in with the forest in the darkness. In the dark, I thought I had found the right path to the cabin, but I found myself stumbling around the woods. Then another gunshot exploded into the quiet night. Then another. I picked up my pace, trying to duck behind trees whenever I could. The realization dawned on me that I had been walking much longer than it should have taken to get to the cabin. I was lost. For a while, I was using my phone's flashlight, but that drained the battery in no time. It's difficult to put into words how terrifying it is to be lost in the woods at night, with no light source and nothing to protect yourself. Every tree looks the same. Every rock looks the same. Everything looks the same. I don't know how long I stumbled around before I came across a small cabin. There was a large bonfire roaring in the front, with what appeared to be some random junk to fuel it. I was starving, dehydrated, and praying for a working phone inside, because I still had no cell service on my dying phone. The police had to come before it was too late. Inside the cabin, I found the most disturbing menagerie of various types of skulls, bones, and taxidermy I've ever seen. I recall seeing dozens of skulls sitting in various places in the cabin, on tables, shelves mounted to the wall, and on top of the refrigerator and cabinets. Some of those skulls were human. Thinking about those skulls sends chills down my spine. I looked for a phone but didn't see one. I was about to leave when I heard an ATV roaring up the mountainside, heading towards my direction. I ducked down in the space behind the couch and the wall. There wasn't enough time for me to run and not be caught. The ATV slammed to a stop by the cabin. I heard a man mumbling to himself, almost yelling in gibberish. The fire hissed after he struggled with something heavy and threw it on. I have considered trying to sneak by the man while he did whatever he was doing, but I was too scared to move. From where I was hiding, I could look out the tiny front window that faced the fire. I saw the man for the first time. He was a huge man, probably close to 7 feet tall, if not that. He was dragging something toward the fire. It was a body. He was putting bodies on the fire. The fire hissed again as he tossed another onto it. There were 2 more bodies on the back of the ATV. When reality hit me, it instantly sent me into shock. So many memories came flooding back. So much laughter and good times. So many times in my life that I will never get to relive. The bodies were my friends. He was burning my murdered friends. What could I do? How could I intervene and stop him before he burned them all? The shock kept me frozen for a while. When I came to my senses, I looked around the cabin, looking for anything that would help me fight this psycho. My first thought was kitchen knives. With the grace of a cat, I ran toward the kitchen. It took a few guesses to find the right drawer, and I grabbed the biggest knife in there. Exploding out of the front door, I yelled,
Hey, fuckface! What are you doing with my friends?
His head turned like a startled deer.
Huh?
Was all he managed. I rushed at him with what remained of my offensive tackle skills. He flew off his feet and flat on his back. He lay winded on the ground, and I punched his face.
You're dead, fucker!
Bam! I felt a pain scorching up my side, and for a second, I thought I had landed in the fire. I touched the area and pulled back, a handful of blood.
Don't interfere, heathen. I'm going to add you to the offering with your friends.
The madman said while laughing.
I wondered where you went to. Perfect. She told me she needs you. She needs a fresh one. Fresh blood. Fresh, tasty, delicious blood.
She? I asked in my stunned horror.
Yes, my wife. I'm bringing her back. The Dark One told me so. I just need to offer enough blood and bodies and she's mine again. You won't ruin this for me.
He declared, aiming the gun at me again. It clicked, but misfired. He pulled the trigger again, and another misfire. I somehow summoned enough adrenaline after the first try. Then after the second, I had some courage back. I tackled him again, this time sending him straight into the fire. He screamed with the most pained, anguished sound I'd ever heard, and I didn't feel bad about it. That bastard could fry for all I cared. The area was reeking of burned flesh and hair, and I hadn't realized it until the adrenaline started dying off. I was trying not to vomit as I ran over to the ATV. To my dismay, I saw that all their bodies were in the fire. Just a disclaimer, this part of the story is 100% true. I wasn't imagining things, and I wasn't delusional from the gunshot wound, blood loss, or the trauma of everything that happened. After I pushed the man into the fire, I looked at it as I got onto the ATV. In the flames, I saw a black shape forming. At first, it was a shapeless mass that began taking shape into a grinning, menacing face. Dirt and rocks flew as I turned the ATV around, and back down the path. I wasn't wasting time. It's cliche to say you're running from the devil, but that's how it felt. The hairs on my neck stood on end until I reached the end of the path. It came out near the bottom of the road that led to the cabin. I rushed up to the cabin and saw the front door was wide open. I rushed in, hoping that those bodies were some other people, but nobody was there. Inside, everything was ransacked like the campsite. I dug around in Ron's room to find his keys lying on the dresser. I also noticed that one of Andrew's rifles was missing from the mount in the living room. I grabbed the one that was left, a box of ammo, and made a mad dash for Ron's SUV. It was about 20 miles to the nearest town, and I got there in half the time. A few minutes after I drove away from the cabin, reality started setting in. My friends were dead, and I somehow survived. Then I remembered the blood. The flow had seemed to stop, but my entire side was drenched, and I was starting to feel lightheaded. I burst into tears, barely able to see the road. I was afraid to pull over in fear that the hunter or that face would find me. I'm thankful that I made it to town alive. The police station was easy to find. I stumbled in, and all that I remember saying was, "My friends are dead," and blacked out. When I came out of the haze of unconsciousness, I was in the hospital bed alone. I looked around, hoping to find one of my friends, but nobody was there. I felt a momentary hope that it was all a horrible dream, and that maybe I had suffered a head injury from a car accident. Anything but the horrible truth. The button to summon the nurse was attached to the arm of my bed. She came in, looking relieved, checked my vitals, then called the police. They interviewed me, and I told them everything, minus the demon face in the fire. They eventually told me I wasn't under arrest. After I was discharged 2 days later, they escorted me to the cabin to retrieve my things. They said they never found the hunter, but did find my friends' bodies. And they said escorting me was for my own safety. I thought about that on my way to the cabin. Didn't I tackle him directly into the fire? How did he survive? To this day, the murders remain unsolved. The hunter, as far as anyone knows, has not reemerged. I still have nightmares about that hunter attacking us, about seeing their bodies and their charred remains inside the fire. The vivid sounds, smells, the pain, it's all relived every night. There has been one other thing that has been haunting me as well, and it's in the literal sense. It's not my friends or the hunter, but the face. That black, shapeless face in the fire. I see it in random places. I see it in windows, mirrors, TV screens, my cell phone screen, in anything reflective. It torments me, mocking me with that smile and that insidious laugh.